Welcome to another episode of Battlefield 4 Hardcore Meta, a series covering all Battlefield 4 primary and sidearm weapons in a specifically hardcore context. In this video, we will be covering the LMGs with the top cyclic rates in BF4, the AWS, M249, and MG4. First, let's go over how to unlock these LMGs. To unlock the AWS, you must complete the assignment Swiss Cheese, which requires you to own the DLC Naval Strike and be at least rank 10, and to obtain 3 LMG ribbons and destroy 3 vehicles as a support. A fairly straightforward assignment and well worthwhile, as even after a number of nerfs, the AWS is often considered to be the best LMG in the game. In order to unlock the M249, you need to complete the assignment Final Duty, which requires you to complete the final campaign mission and at the end give the C4 to Irish. Keep in mind, the P90 and QBZ-95-1 are also unlocked by completing the final mission and handing the C4 to Hannah instead, or taking the C4 and sacrificing yourself. You don't have to replay the whole campaign to get the 3 weapons. You merely have to make the choice thrice, meaning you only have to replay a small segment of the campaign to get all 3 weapons fairly quickly. The MG4 merely requires you to obtain LMG experience, though a sizable amount, 48,000 LMG score. Going over the common traits, all 3 of these LMGs have the same ADS move speed of 50% base move speed, meaning you will move fairly slowly when aimed down sights. They also share the same standard low damage profile. You can get a kill with 3 shots anywhere to the body out to 34 meters. If you land nothing but chest shots, this extends to 47 meters. A headshot and chest shot results in a kill out to 54 meters. At any range the bullet is still flying. It takes 4 shots to kill a target anywhere to the body, or 2 if you manage 2 consecutive headshots. After these 2 stats, most stats are perfectly shared between the M249 and MG4, with the only differences being the recoil pattern and deploy times. With the AWS having the most unique traits, it still has a number of similarities. Moving on to those similar stats, the RPM of these 3 LMGs is largely what unifies them as bullet hoses. The M249 and MG4 share the same 800 rounds per minute firing rate. This places them at the top rate of fire overall and makes their time to kill significantly strong in close to medium ranges. The AWS comes in only a little behind at 780 RPM, largely still placing it well above every other LMG, except for its 2 box mag bullet hose brethren. With high rates of fire in BF4 comes poor bloom and fade values. The spread increase and spread decrease of the MG4 and M249 are the same at a bloom of 0.104 and a fade of 9.7. This almost matches the higher damaging PKP's values, making the weapons fairly inaccurate for longer bursts when considering the damage per shot. However, because of the very high cyclic rate, misses end up not dooming you nearly as much. The AWS has a smidge better spread increase value of 0.101 and a noticeably worse spread decrease speed of 10.2. This means that you are actually a little better off going for slightly longer bursts and longer pauses between those bursts in comparison for middle-ranged combat. In general though, these LMGs fire fast and lose their accuracy just as quickly. Moving on from those stats that largely define what these LMGs are, I want to remind you again that the source of most of these differences stem from the AWS, since the 2 box mag LMGs are nearly identical. Starting on a strong note, the magazine size and resulting kill capacity of the MG4 and M249 are massive, placing them at the top spot of the Type 88, with 200 rounds before needing a reload. Capable of downing 66 1/3 targets within their 3-hit kill ranges, more than double the entire enemy team. It'll likely be rare that you ever even need to reload these monsters. The AWS is fairly tame in comparison, with a 100 plus 1 round magazine. The AWS is still able to kill about half the same number of targets, 33 2/3. This of course is still more than the total number of possible enemy combatants on the enemy team, and is dead average for LMGs, which tend to have excellent capacities. Of course, you will sometimes reload these guns, and when you do, it'll take a while. The MG4 and M249 have the same reload time regardless if they're empty or not, at 6.2 seconds. The AWS, however, uses a conventional magazine, meaning tactical reloads are noticeably faster and give you an extra round in the chamber. Not that the extra round has much influence when you already have 100 other rounds ready to fire. At 3.35 seconds tactical and 4.7 seconds empty, you are pretty fairly heavily punished for letting your magazine hit empty in terms of reload time. This leads to the overall ammo reliability of the guns, and in this case the MG4 and M249 have the best overall ammo reliability of any fully automatic firearm. This enables you to stay in the thick of combat and just keep dishing out death long after most other weapons have run completely dry, and they have reload times a full second shorter compared to the only other LMG with that capability, the Type 88. The AWS's ammo reliability is also very strong. While it's not the literal best, its rank is only a few notches lower, having the 5th best overall ammo reliability of any primary in the game. You'll still be plenty comfortable with its uptime. So with that all in mind, being in the thick of combat means you are likely to run into some situations where you will need to rely on hipfire. The 2-box magazine options here unfortunately might disappoint you. Their hip cone while moving is 6, the second worst possible value. Their resulting hit performance is helped somewhat by their RPM, but they actually end up being statistically less reliable killers when hip-fired than the slower-firing M240B, a weapon that really can't be relied upon for hip-firing at all. The AWS only fares a little better with a hip cone of 5.5. However, this is a significant enough improvement that it overwhelms the dip in RPM and makes the AWS have a more or less middling hipfire performance among LMGs. Still not ideal, as you'll lose to most other full autos, but at least it won't leave you completely out to dry. So with the ability to fire loads of lead downrange, how accurate are these LMGs? For the box magazine LMGs, the answer is not very. With a 0.3 minimum aimed spread and a 1.15 effective moving aimed spread, the bullet hose box mag LMGs match many of the other large box mag LMGs, and will tend to miss more often than not at middle ranges, and will generally be fairly worthless when fired while moving and aiming, being the worst possible for LMGs. The AWS, on the other hand, comes out with a noticeably better set of aimed spread values. A minimum aim spread of 0.25, placing it at a middling level of stationary accuracy, and a moving aimed spread of 0.875. For once, despite the slower moving speed compared to bullpups, and sharing a moving aimed accuracy with the LSAT, which I do not suggest moving and firing with, the AWS is actually not bad when aimed and moving, simply because of the capability of pre-fire due to the large magazine, as well as a fast firing rate. A constant wall of lead can help overcome the loss in accuracy from moving and shooting. However, I'd still generally advise stopping and firing most of the time. The next stat I want to go over is max spread, a stat that generally only really comes into play for LMGs, and this is a case where the MG4 and M249 have max spreads on the poorer side of things for LMGs, at 2.2. This can be moderately overcome with the fact that they fire lots of rounds in a short time, but it's still not generally advisable that you never pause between bursts. The same can be said of the AWS, though to a lesser degree. It has a middling LMG max spread value of 2. This will make the AWS perform moderately better with maximally long bursts, though be a bit wary, as it also has about half the rounds per reload. When it comes to the muzzle velocity, the MG4 and M249 have a dead average velocity of 620 meters per second. This is more than enough for the ranges in which you ought to be using them, and should make hitting moving targets a breeze in conjunction with their high RPM. The AWS, unfortunately, is the second worst LMG in this regard, with a velocity of 580 meters a second. This is still perfectly acceptable for middle-ranged combat, combat that you ought to be using it for anyway, but you will notice this decrease in velocity. Next, let's cover the recoil decrease. For the two box mag LMGs, they have a recoil decrease of 12, the worst possible value for a full auto. When combined with these LMGs' extreme rates of fire, their recoil tends to pile up fairly easily. The AWS, on the other hand, is somewhat better with a recoil decrease of 15. This is still fairly poor as far as full autos go, but it's a middling value for LMGs. Again, its high rate of fire will cause this lack of reset speed to be more noticeable. Finally, the last two traits I want to cover are the only statistical areas that are different for all three LMGs: recoil pattern and deploy time. Starting with the recoil, the MG4's upward recoil is the worst of the bunch at 0.37. This is a worse than average upwards recoil, and with the gun's fast rate of fire and the earlier mentioned slow recoil reset ends up giving the gun the second worst upward fluid recoil for an LMG. The only LMG that's worse is the M240B. Coming in both the middle of these LMGs and in the middle of LMGs in general is the AWS with an upwards recoil of 0.35. Again, while this is a middling value, the slow recoil reset and high rate of fire largely turn this into a worse value than it might seem at first glance, though among LMGs it's not too terrible. With the lowest of the three is the M249, with an upwards recoil of 0.325. This is also mostly a middling value, and it's only a smidge better than the AWS. That slight edge is largely eclipsed by it having a slower reset speed. In reality, they both end up feeling fairly similar in this respect in overall upward pull. The M249 just jostles less. Next, let's cover the horizontal recoil. This is where the MG4 beats the rest. With a leftward pull of 0.2 and a rightward pull of 0.4, the MG4's horizontal recoil is the overall best of the bunch. While it is lopsided to the right, all three LMGs are lopsided, and its overall recoil is the lowest of the bullet hose LMGs, giving it slightly more precision in this regard. Not too far behind is the AWS, with a leftward pull of 0.25 and a rightward pull of 0.38. The AWS bounces around a little more than the MG4, though is slightly less lopsided. And of course, it shouldn't be forgot that it has a better aimed spread, as well as a better recoil reset speed. On the bottom of the totem pole is the M249. With a leftward pull of 0.4 and a rightward of 0.3, the M249 ends up flopping left and right fairly noticeably with its fast RPM and terrible reset speed. This ends up making it technically the second least accurate LMG in the game for sustained fire, with only the M240B being worse. The only thing left with recoil is the first shot multiplier and the resulting first shot upward recoil. In this case, the MG4 has the dubious honor of sharing the worst LMG first shot recoil multiplier of 1.85 times with the QBB 951. But unlike that gun, the MG4's kick is simply worse on every other count. This results in an effective first shot upward recoil that is actually worse than the horrendously inaccurate M240B of 0.685. The MG4's first shot kicks like a mule. The M249's first shot recoil multiplier comes in next at 1.5. This is a slightly worse than average multiplier, but because its upward recoil isn't too harsh in the first place, the effective first recoil comes to a dead middle of 0.488. The AWS technically has a proportionally less harsh initial kick with a multiplier of 1.4, but this results in an effective first shot upward recoil of 0.49, which is not meaningfully different from the M249. Looking the values over, this means the AWS has a roughly evened out recoil. The MG4 has a sharp upwards kick but a more horizontal kick, resulting in a bit more precision at the cost of mid-range controllability. And the M249 has less of an upwards kick but more noticeable horizontal kick, resulting in better mid-range controllability at the penalty of precision. The final stat I wanted to go over is the deploy time. It likely comes to little surprise that the AWS has the swiftest deploy time of the three, coming in at 0.95 seconds. This is a little better than average for LMGs, and makes the AWS at least semi-acceptable for equipment juggling and dealing with landing from falls and jumps. The MG4 comes in after with a flat time of 1 second. This is dead average for LMGs, and while it's not impressive, it isn't so penalizing as to make switching to it feel like an excessive risk. This, however, cannot be said of the M249, which has an atrocious 1.3 second deploy time, slow as possible for not only LMGs, but also all primary weapons. The only other gun with this value is the U100. In general, when using the M249, avoid juggling your equipment and avoid too much verticality or vaulting, as this will often put you at significant disadvantage. Now that we've covered the stats, let's go over the suggested builds. First, the AWS should get a compensator and an angled/folding grip. This is a situation where the heavy barrel is of questionable use due to the significant penalty to upwards kick with a fairly minute improvement to first shot precision. To deal with the increase in spread bloom, bursting your shots will generally get the job done and turn the AWS into a middle range room cleaner. For the 2-box magazine LMGs, the heavy barrel and bipod can make a lot of sense for defensive tactics in indoors areas. However, because of their high cyclic rates, run and gun builds with grips are also fairly viable. The M249 is generally straightforward. It both tactically and statistically works well with the heavy barrel and stubby/potato grip. Stick to middle range and spray walls of lead at your enemy, though don't expect precision. The MG4 is a somewhat more open-ended situation. Regardless, you should go with the heavy barrel. However, both the angled/folding grip or stubby/potato grip are viable choices as well. The angled grip technically has by far the most statistical effect. However, if you compare that directly with the M249's build with a stubby grip, it ends up being a somewhat inferior version of that, only getting a minutely better first shot recoil multiplier and horizontal recoil, but worse bloom. This can still be worthwhile if only because the better deploy time you get if you want to do a lot of vertical combat or swap equipment a lot. But really, the stubby will do a better job allowing the MG4's superior precision for longer bursts to shine. You just have to get over that initial kick and avoid microbursting. As for sights and accessories, it should come as no surprise that I advise a one-time sight and laser sight. These LMGs are not really any good for longer range shooting that would necessitate any zoom, and a laser is obviously handy for weapons that work best in the heat of combat, where hip firing naturally will become needed. For all three of these LMGs, I advise the mare's leg as a sidearm. The mare's leg does the most to cover for the longer ranged areas, where these LMGs honestly don't perform their best. Since they have excellent ammo reliability, a fast draw sidearm is not needed. As usual, I suggest the ammo box for pretty much any support build. However, the M249 and MG4 both arguably are decent options for skipping it if you want to go for a build that combines two other support gadgets. With their immense pools of ammo, you aren't particularly likely to run into a significant need to refill before running into another fellow support player or simply having to redeploy anyway. Also, almost always my first pick for the support class for vehicle maps is C4, and this is a case in particular where C4 makes a lot of sense, as these are bullet hose LMGs that will find themselves fairly comfortable on the front lines, in a situation where you are more likely to run across enemy armored vehicles. In infantry-only situations for the MG4 and M249, the XM25 airburst makes a lot more sense. There isn't a serious need for short-range weaponry in this case, and the XM25 can make short work of enemies running behind cover to avoid your shots. The AWS can also go decently well with the ballistic shield or the XM25 smoke launcher in infantry-only maps, due mostly to the more reasonable deploy time and superior hip-firing performance. As for grenades, a smoke grenade obviously holds a lot of utility for allowing you to safely get in closer to vehicles for a C4 detonation. But if you are skipping the C4 for a more anti-infantry oriented setup, flares can be fairly effective in making you hard to spot in close quarters, and this suits the MG4 and M249, especially if you use them with a bipod. To go more with its even more aggressive playstyle, I'd suggest the RGO or M67 for the AWS. As for field upgrade, the offensive field upgrade makes the most sense for these LMGs. They typically suit an aggressive objective playstyle that benefits more from the set of boons that come with that line of perks. Faster sprinting, an extra grenade, and a longer safe fall distance all allow for an even more aggressive playstyle. If you choose to forego the ammo box, the additional ammunition you get from the ammo upgrade is fairly useful as well if you find yourself suppressive firing a lot. In particular, if you do decide to opt out of the ammo box, box with the MG4 and M249, perimeter defense can work decently well, as it will give you extra ammunition right away to cover for the lack of an ammo box, and then eventually give you a stronger suppressive effect, which will go well with the rapid firing of the two LMGs. The MP-APS upgrade can also, to a lesser degree, be useful if you find yourself encountering a lot of vehicles that end up firing upon you with explosive ordnance. In conclusion, these three LMGs combine the most rapid firing rates available with massive magazines, and as a result are the choice for you if you want to effectively tear your way through hordes of enemies. They are excellent for objective play or just plain kill accumulation. If you want to be informed of future video releases by me, please consider subscribing and clicking the bell for notifications. Also consider liking the video if you enjoyed it. If there is something I missed, or you think I got wrong, or if you just want to contribute to discussion, please feel free to comment as well.